Okay, good morning. Back to it. We are working our way through you are working your way through your final project, fourth milestone starting today, and then next week we'll start in on A/B testing and we'll talk about A/B testing next week. Any questions about the final project? Some of you are getting into the meat of things now. Some of you have a relatively challenging task environment, a robot with lots of motors and sensors and neurons and synapses, which means there's a lot of work for your evolutionary algorithm to do. And it may be that your evolutionary algorithm isn't up to the task. So what do? How do you strengthen your evolutionary algorithm? What are some obvious things?
Add more neurons or hidden layers to that.
Add more neurons or hidden layers, which might help the robot. You made the robot more complicated, but now the evolutionary algorithm has even more heavy lifting to do. How do we make the evolutionary algorithm stronger? It's climbing Mount Mansfield in the fog.
Run it for more generations.
Run it for more generations, increase the population size. These are easy things to do, right? And for some of you, it's changing a single number in your constants file. Start with that. You do that, you start running it on your laptop for a few minutes, a few hours, you start to hear the fan going on your laptop. Now you've made things easier on the evolutionary algorithm, but harder on your computer. What do we do about that? That's a little trickier. Okay. Couple things you can do. Once you start to increase the population size of your parallel hill climber, or some of you may be now coding up multi-objective optimization, you have a larger population size, which means in essence, you're dropping more climbers on the fitness landscape, right? You don't know where the peak is for your particular final project. Where's the combination of synaptic weights that'll get your robot to climb the ladder, climb the stairs, stay on the runway, you name it. Okay, so we've got a larger population size, and you'll remember that you now have these two processes that are communicating with one another, and they're communicating with each other using files, reading and writing files. A terribly inelegant way to get two processes running on your computer to communicate. But it's the simplest thing for us to do. That's why we did it in this class. Okay. What you can do is instead of running all 25 robots in parallel, meaning if you have a population size of 25, instead of starting up 25 physics engines that are all running in parallel on your laptop, which your laptop may or may not be able to handle, if you go back to the Parallel Hill Climber subreddit module and read through, you'll see in there how you parallelized the running of multiple physics engines in the first place. You can deparallelize things. You can go back to running 5 simulations in parallel, and when they're done and the fitness for those robots is calculated, you send the next 5, third 5, fourth 5, fifth 5, and now you've evaluated all 25 all 25 robots. Alternatively, you can run just one at a time. It's going to take longer on your machine, but it's going to reduce the computational pressure on your laptop. Okay. Most of you have probably gotten to this point already. It's a little bit of a juggling act, making things not too hard on your laptop, not too hard on your evolutionary algorithm, not too hard on the robot, and so on. Okay. Any other things I can help with before we jump back to lecture material? Going once? Okay. All right. We are going to finish off our very long module today on open challenges in the field of evolutionary robotics. We're working our way through the last aspect of open challenges, which is scalability. How do we scale up the creation of ever more robots? To do that, the obvious thing is get the robots to do it. Get them to make more of themselves. We motivated this by talking about the theoretical side of self-reproduction. Factories can make lots of cars, but if we make factories that make less cars, but on the side they also make other factories, in the long run, you're going to end up making many more cars. Obviously, this is how Mother Nature does things. Can we similarly create self-replicating machines? If you manage to evolve the design for a useful robot, could you ask your evolutionary algorithm to keep evolving that robot, to keep doing whatever it is you want, and for that robot to also construct a copy of itself along the way? This idea goes back to the 1940s. John von Neumann had this vision back then of these machines that would do useful work, like, for example, building a colony on the moon, but on their off hours, they would also start to build other copies of themselves. Those copies would take off and fly to Mars, start building colonies there, and on you go. Takes a little while to get started, but once this process starts rolling, you can do things at scale, like, for example, settling the solar system. Nice idea. Turns out, actually, in practice, not too difficult to achieve self-replication. So the reading for last time came from a late 1950s Scientific American article where a mathematician, Penrose, in his garage did a little bit of carpentry and showed how if you get the geometry of these little wooden parts just right, and then you apply some energy by shaking this box with these parts in it back and forth, you can get them not to self-replicate, but to create a crystal, something that starts to grow and has repeated patterns across its length. And in the video we watched last time, he showed how if you keep adding a little bit more detail to these wooden contraptions, not a lot of detail, you can end up actually getting self-replication. We jumped last time into a little digression on chemistry. You can actually get chemical species or batches of chemicals to also self-replicate, different admixtures of elements. If you have elements catalyze themselves slowly, but there are other elements that act, or macromolecules that act as enzymes, that's the E. And if you get this to work just right, you can get what's called a hypercycle. Element A produces B, produces C, produces D, which in turn produces E, produces A again. Okay, a little bit of a digression for us. If you can get this all to work, it's possible that there might be some slight changes to this chemical soup by chance. This is happening in a tidal pool, or it's happening in a small cavern underground. Some additional chemicals happen to slosh in and makes a slight change to this hypercycle and actually gets this hypercycle to produce more of this macromolecule faster, because now there are only 4 elements in this loop. Imagine inside this tidal pool or this cave, we have now little mini soups of chemicals floating around. One of them produces more of itself faster than the other one does. What happens? That one takes over. No one knows, because this happened a very long time ago, but this is one of the leading hypotheses for how chemistry became biology. Okay, a digression for us, but self-replication, making more of yourself, possibly through intermediate steps, is a very old idea and may be useful in robotics. We'll see. Okay. We're not going to talk about this particular experiment from 2007, but this was an attempt to build physical robots that could self-reproduce. You'll notice in the title that it refers to modular robots. We'll come back and talk about modular robots a little bit later. You can see what the modules are. They're cubes. And as long as we keep feeding this self-replicating robot by putting more of these modules on the 2 wooden towers that you see there, it'll eventually grab them and start to attach them to this other tower of modules on the other side, which is the offspring of this parent robot. So the parent just made a copy of itself. We remove the parent, and again, if we keep feeding the child, it will eventually make a grandchild, and this process will continue indefinitely. You'll notice there's some white tiles built into the wooden floor. What are those white tiles for? Power, yeah. So we're supplying power and control commands coming from below. So they're not strictly autonomous yet, partly autonomous, but there's still a lot of care and feeding, literally feeding in this case, from the human handlers, but a demonstration that you could achieve self-replication in robots. We're going to look at an extension of this project in a moment and spend a few minutes talking about that extension. There are a number, and this extension that we're going to look at in a moment removed some of the constraints from this experiment. This was difficult to pull off from a mechanical engineering perspective. There's a lot going on here, so there's a lot of constraints built in. We, the humans, supply power through the floor. We, the humans, supply a control policy through the floor. So there's a controller that is sending a signal up through this tower, telling all of the blocks how to move. This robot is not an evolved robot. It's not deciding on its own how to move. Third constraint, as I've already mentioned, is we are providing the raw material from which it builds itself. So in the extension project you're going to see in a moment, they're going to roll back the second of those three constraints. We're going to see whether we can get robots to come up with their own controllers. Can they figure out how to self-reproduce on their own without us telling them how to do so? Okay. A couple other things I want you to notice about this particular robot. As I mentioned, it's already made of modules. You might be able to see these little metal circles embedded in the center of each of the 6 faces. These are little magnets, so they attach together. And then through the magnets, a cube that's closer to the floor can send power to the cube that it's just grabbed. So this growing tower becomes powered and also controlled the moment it's grabbed by another block. You'll notice that these cubes rotate about their grand diagonal. There's a diagonal cut through the cube, and there is one motor inside each cube that rotates the 2 halves of the cube relative to one another. And if the upper half of the cube has some cubes attached to it, that whole arm rotates through 3-dimensional space. Yeah. So kind of an odd robot. We haven't seen anything like this before, but you can see how a lot of these mechanical design decisions were made to facilitate the one and only thing this robot is designed to do, which is self-replicate. Cool. Not very useful. Remember that ultimately the reason we're doing this is because we would like to create machines that self-replicate and do a bit of useful work on the side. It's okay if they only do a little bit of useful work on the side, because if they also self-replicate, some short time period into the future, there'll be another robot that also does a little bit of work on the side. And then, by the way, there'll be 2 more that do a little bit of work on the side. And if you start to sum up or accumulate all of those bits of useful work that those robots are doing, you'll eventually get what's called exponential utility. So we're back to economics for a moment. Utility is just a fancy economics word for doing useful stuff for humans. That's ultimately what we're interested in, and presumably we'd like to have a lot of this. It would be great for there to be an autonomous car in Burlington. It would be great if there's more. So how do we get many more useful robots? Can we grow the amount of useful work performed by robots in general? How is that going to scale going into the future? If we do this in any way other than self-replication, we just create traditional factories that pump out more and more autonomous cars and drones, we'll never achieve exponential utility. It's possible that there is another path forward to large numbers of useful machines, which is to get them to self-replicate And possibly, if they do, and we as a species decide we want to let this happen, we could achieve exponential utility. For today's lecture, we're not going to worry about utility. The robots don't actually do anything other than self-replicate. So far, so good? Questions? All right, lights are coming back on. Okay. All right, so what I just showed you was obviously a physical robot. We're going to go from real back to sim. We're going to look at a simulated experiment. This was actually kind of a sister project. It was taking place alongside the physical robot that you just saw. Here's a cartoon example of the robot that you just saw. However, we're now going to simulate this robot. We're going to simulate it not in 2 dimensions. We're going to simulate it, or not in 3 dimensions. We're going to simulate it in 2 dimensions. So we're going to be dealing with squares. Each square has 4 faces. We're going to label those faces A, B, C, and D. These squares can attach to other squares, as you see here. And in my little cartoon example here, remember that each and every module in this modular robot has one motor in it, which can rotate the 2 halves of the module relative to itself. So in this cartoon example here, the motor in this particular module has turned on, and it's going to rotate the half that contains side B and C relative to A and D. So you can see this sort of little arm up here. It's going to rotate out of the 2-dimensional plane and then come back again and land in the plane. And you can see now B and C have swapped places. So the square has rotated, and it's rotated its little arm, the little arm that's attached to it. So we're simplifying the robot, and we're going to put it into simulation. Okay. Why are we going to do this in simulation? As I mentioned, these authors are going to try and observe the spontaneous emergence of self-replication. They're not going to program self-replication into the robot the way these authors did. Okay. Here's an example of the simulation. It's not a physics engine. It's a very, very simple simulation. We've got a whole bunch of black pixels. Wherever there's a black pixel, nothing's going on. Everywhere there is a non-black pixel, that pixel represents one and only one cube. Okay, we're only talking about the robots yet. We haven't talked about their controllers yet. Okay. You'll notice that many of these robots are made up of just one module. So here's a little maroon cube sitting here. It's free to rotate its motor. If it does, the 2 halves will rotate relative to one another, but that's about it. Imagine that this is a single snapshot, a single moment in time in the simulation. Imagine that from one moment in the simulation to the next, this maroon cube activates its motor, the 2 halves rotate. What are you going to see here at the next time step? Exactly the same thing. Nothing's happened. Okay. Over here, there's 1, 2, 3 cubes that just happen to be sitting next to one another. Imagine this is the first time step of the simulation. We've just placed a bunch of these cubes at random locations, and it just happens that there are 3 sitting next to one another. Remember that they have magnetized sides, so they are attached together. This is a 3-module robot. If any one of the motors turns on, in this example, then at the next time step, we might see this group of 3 modules, quote unquote, move. One piece will stay stationary, and it will rotate the other 2 about itself, like you see over here. So far, so good? Okay. So we've taken a whole bunch of robots, placed them at random locations. What do you think the colors represent? Why different colors?
A, B, C, or D size kind of facing, or what combination is facing the top?
It's a good guess. I haven't told you, so you got to guess. That's a good guess. You'll notice there's a lot more than 4 colors, so probably not that. It could have been the orientation of the cube. It's a good guess. It's not that. What haven't I told you about yet?
We don't know anything about the brain of the controller.
It's the controller. So every robot here, like your robots in the first generation of your parallel hill climber, they all have random controllers. Okay, so let's have a look at these controllers. I'm going to turn the lights back on. These controllers are quite different from any controllers you've seen so far. They are not neural networks. They are binary trees. And those of you that have taken a data structures course before, you've heard of binary trees. If you're a non-CS major, you may not have heard of this before. What's a binary tree? Well, it's a data structure. It's a big collection of variables where the variables are stored inside the nodes of the tree, and there is a particular hierarchical arrangement between these variables. If you've ever worked with Python, you're pretty comfortable with putting a whole bunch of numbers in a list. You're probably comfortable with putting numbers into a dictionary. Those are all different kinds of data structures. This is a particular type of data structure known as a tree. Okay. In each individual cube, there are 3 different binary trees. We're going to talk about each one in turn. And these 3 trees together, that's the brain of the square, the brain of the module. The brain is going to, the trees, like the neural networks you've been working with so far, are going to take in sensory information, what the cube senses, and is going to send commands to the motors, get the robot to do something. Okay, let's start with this example binary tree here. As I mentioned, they're random. So we're going to create these trees at random, meaning we're going to grab stuff and put them inside these nodes. I misspoke. Actually, we have heard about trees before. Where did we hear about trees? And putting random stuff inside the empty nodes. Hopefully this sounds a little bit familiar.
Isn't the neat algorithm?
The neat algorithm. The neat algorithm, the genomes were sets of lists when we had a neural network. So there were 2 lists describing features of the neurons and features of the synapses. So that was a combination of lists and neural networks, not trees. You may or may not remember what in the evolutionary algorithms lecture, we talked about genetic programming. Creating equations that would describe data that we fed to it. Sound familiar? Maybe yes, yeah, a few nods. Okay, so we have seen trees before. We're now seeing them in a very different context. Okay. All right. So what do we put inside these nodes at random? The first thing we ask is, what we're going to do is take the 4 letters, the 4 sides, and pick one of them at random. In this case, it's B, as you see here. Then A, D, just at random, A, D, C, C, and so on. Okay. Okay, so you'll notice there's a little question mark next to B. This is meant to query the B sensor. So let's take a given square. Let's take this one here. We go to its B side, and the B sensor is basically a touch sensor. Is there another cube on my B side? Is there another square on my B side or not? Yes or no? For this particular square, if this is the brain inside that square, sorry, it's this one down here. So if this brain is inside this square, the answer to, is there a neighbor on my B side? The answer is no. So we go from the top of the tree down here on this side. We follow the N down here. And as we go down here, the robot is going to perform an action, which is to turn its A magnet off. You'll notice at the top level here, it's A magnet. At the next level down, it's B magnet. At the next level down in the tree, there's a command what to do with the C magnet. And then the fourth and final level in the tree is what to do with the D magnet. So this binary tree has a depth, a depth that's set at 4. Depth 1, 2, 3, 4. And at each level as we go from one level to the next, did I get that right? 1, 2, 3, 4. No, sorry, depth 5. As we go from each level to the next, we're going to perform an action with the A magnet, the B magnet, the C magnet, and the D magnet. So inside the nodes, that's sensory information. And as we move from one level to the next, that tells the square what to do with its magnets. So let's build up an intuition about this. This square is running this brain. It starts at the top of the tree. It looks to see whether it has a neighbor on its B side. It does not. So it goes down here and it turns its A magnet off. Now it gets here, and by chance, we've placed a D in here. Where does it go next? Where does the square descend in this tree? Does it go to the left or the right? Goes left, right? It goes, are we in this one here? I've switched the labels on you, N and Y. So this is a little complicated. When we have this tree, we're sprinkling a whole bunch of things in the nodes and on the edges. We need to have a no and a yes. In this case, it's changed. So the D here, this cube looks on its D side and it sees yes. It does have a neighbor on the D side, so it follows the Y edge. So it comes down here, and the Y edge tells it to turn the B magnet off. So at each time step, the square is going to descend this tree in some order, and as it goes down the tree, it's going to turn the A, B, C, and its A, B, C, and D magnet either on or off, depending on the labeling of the tree. And all these labels are attached at random. Yes?
Doesn't whatever's in the nodes is at random?
Yep.
But it seems like it's not random because next to B is A and D, and then next to D is C and C.
Well,
it's just the first node, or is that also random?
they're all random. Maybe this is my bad random number generator that I'm running in my head. Could be something like this.
Okay.
It's all at random, right? In the same way that in your assignments, you start with random floating point numbers for all the synapses. Same idea here. So what's not random is that it's a decision about A at the top level, then B, then C, then D. But depending on the robot's circumstances, depending on what it senses at any given moment, it might descend through this tree differently. So far, so good? Okay. So we've gone through, we're evaluating the brain of this robot. I mentioned that there are 3 binary trees. That's the one that deals with the magnets. The next one, exactly the same thing. We're going to have a binary tree, meaning that every node has 2 nodes below it. It has a depth of 5, so it's the same thing again. And also, again, we're going to randomly put one of the 4 sides, A, B, C, or D, into every one of the nodes. So all of that is the same. But now, when the square has finished descending through this tree, it starts descending through the second tree inside itself. So in this case, the robot asks, is there a neighbor on my A side? The answer is no, so it follows the no edge. And in this case, as it goes from the top of the tree to the next layer down in the tree, instead of changing the state of its magnets, it either swivels or doesn't swivel its motor. So in this case, it says swivel AB. So here's AB here. So AB is going to rotate relative to CD. So CD stays where it is, and AB rotates. So if we were to redraw this robot now, it would still have C and D here, but B would be here, and A would be down here. Everybody see that? Question.
How does the robot rotate A, C, and B, D? Because they're not like on the.
Good point. So we've just done AB. So when we get to the next level, the first level says whether or not to swivel AB. So where did we get to? We got to down here, which is swivel AB. Now it's asking, is there a neighbor on my A side? This gets tricky. B and A just swap places. So A is now sitting here. There is still no neighbor out here. So whichever of these two branches is the no branch, it follows that branch. And as it goes down, there is a command about whether or not to rotate CD. So up until now, I've been telling you that these modules have just one motor inside them. In this simulated version, each square has more than one motor inside it. This is going to dictate whether to rotate CD relative to AB. So now the AB side stays still, and it's the CD side that rotates. Everybody see that? When CD rotates, it's going to rotate this, 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 and this along with it. Okay. Next level down in the tree, swivel AC. So now this half of the square and this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing rotate, but this half of the square and this piece stay where they are. Question?
So if you are using like just this initial diagram and you swiveled A and B, like the first switch you do with A and B,
Yep.
would it then be possible to swivel A and C from that position, or would that be like on the same?
Right, because now you'd have C and A over there. That's a great question. I don't know what happens when it gets here. You're right, because now it's A and C. I'm not sure how they handled that in the paper. It's possible that they did it this way instead of along the diagonal.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not sure. Great question. Okay. For our purposes, details don't matter too much. We have one part of the brain that magnetizes or demagnetizes the four sides. The second part of the brain rotates different halves of the cube and sometimes takes the cube's neighbors along for the ride. The third and final part of the brain is not self-replication. It's a copying event. So same thing, we've got a binary tree like before. We're going to fill every node with random letters chosen from A, B, C, or D. And now when this cube runs the third tree starting from the top, in this case D, it does have a neighbor, so it follows the yes side. And as it does, it overwrites its controller into the neighbor on its A side, which is over here. The robot does not have a neighbor on its A side, so it's writing code into the void. Nothing really happens. There was an attempted overwrite command. At the next level down in the tree, it will try or not to overwrite. It'll take all of its three trees and overwrite the three trees in its B neighbor if it has one, which it doesn't. If it gets down here and tries to take its three trees and write them into its neighbor on its D side, it would be successful. Whatever the three trees are that are inside this cube, it'd be overwritten by this cube. So far, so good? Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we've got a whole bunch. Hopefully you can still see the colored pixels there. This is time step 1. Every single non-black pixel that you see is a square, and each square, each pixel has 3 of these trees inside it, and they're all random. So there should be more or less more or less unique colors here. There's a couple of groups together that have the same color. That makes me think there was a t equals 0. Something's already happened. But we'll assume this is kind of the first time step. Everybody has random brains. We're going to start to run this process forward. It's not necessarily an evolutionary process because we haven't defined a fitness function. No fitness function in this experiment. There is a population, so to speak. We've got all these different pixels. They've all got random brains. At each time step, every square gets to run each of its 3 trees. This is what's happened at time step 750. What's happened? Some clusters forming. So there seems to have been a cube, a single cube, that copied its controller into a neighboring cube, at which point the receiving cube turns the same color as the donating cube, right? And then that one seems to have written something into another cube, and we've got sort of this cluster of cubes that are all doing exactly the same thing. Now what's happening? Question?
Yeah, I just want to like clarify something.
Sure,
So
sure.
when 2 cubes do touch, that last tree is the one that says like, yes, you can connect and override, but there's also a possibility that it just like doesn't, and then they don't touch anymore.
So if 2 cubes are touching,
Yeah. So
yep, the one that's executing its controller, the one that's thinking, gets to overwrite its controller into the other one.
Is there also a possibility that it doesn't?
Possibly. Good question. So one other detail I haven't mentioned is they're all going to get to run their own controller, but which one gets to run its controller first? So at every time step, there's a random ordering. At a given time step, this one gets to execute its brain first, then this one, then this one, then this one. At the next time step, this one gets to execute its controller first, then this one, then this one, then this one. So back to your question, if there are 2 of them touching, and this one's brain is about to try and overwrite into this one, and this one has a brain which is going to try and write its controllers into this one, it's whoever gets to go first. This one goes first, it overwrites, and now this one is a clone. Yeah? Make sense? Okay. So we see more clusters forming, bigger clusters. So there's larger and larger sets of cubes that are attached that all have identical brains. What else is happening now? It's not just that there are more and bigger clusters. What else is happening? Let's keep going.
Moving towards the outside.
They're moving towards the outside, maybe just by chance, but you're right, there's a little bit of a void in the center.
Variation in color is going down.
The variation in color is going down, right? So some of these controllers, just by chance, were able to copy themselves into other cubes, and depending on how that worked, those small subset of controllers caused those recipient cubes and their neighbors to pass that controller on again. What else is happening? It may be difficult to see in the back there, but there are a bunch of blobs, separate blobs, that have the same color. What does that mean? They have the same controller. So there are now, you can see these blobs of red here. Each of these blobs is a collective of cubes that are running the same controller, and there is some other blob of connected cubes, separate and quite distant, that has the identical set of controllers running on it. Now there is the presence of self-replication. We started with nothing, then we saw things that kind of look like crystal growth. We see the same triplet of trees spreading through a big connected set of cubes, but then we start to see separated blobs of the same color. Now we've gone from nothing to growth to self-replication. There's no fitness function that's rewarding for self-replication. All that was built in is the capability of one cube to copy its controller into another one. That's not the same as self-replication. Okay, if we keep going, you'll notice a fair bit of red down here in the lower right, a little bit of green over here. Now there's some magenta up here, much more magenta, more magenta, more magenta. What's going on here? Over these 4,500 time steps of a single simulation, now what's happening? What does it mean for there to be multiple sets? Within each set, there's a bunch of blobs disconnected blobs that all have the same color. What does it mean that towards the end, there's more than one set of blobs of different colors?
There's just multiple controllers that can produce this behavior.
There's more than one controller that can produce this behavior. So it's hard not to use the word species at this point, right? There's groups of self-replicating things that both of those two separate things self-replicate, but they self-replicate in different ways. They have different form and function. If they were to crash into one another, I don't know what would happen. They may or may not be able to reproduce, but definitely you start to see different sets of self-replicating entities, none of which was built in from the start. The only thing that was built in was this. So that's why the authors titled their paper Spontaneous Emergence. At some point, there wasn't self-replication, there weren't multiple species, and somewhere along the line, it spontaneously emerged. Maybe, it's hard to say, maybe not unlike hypercycles. So if we want to create self-replicating machines, we might sit down and use our brains to think up controllers that cause the robots to move and self-replicate. Or if we set things up carefully and then start from initial conditions, sometimes we get self-replication for free. Not quite for free. We had to build in controllers that could copy themselves into another empty vessel, but close. Kind of interesting. Okay. To finish off this lecture, we're going to skip ahead to yet another self-replicating system, which we're going to come back and talk about in the last lecture. These are the Xenobots. So just to remind you, Xenobot, Xeno is short for Xenopus laevis. Every single teeny tiny white circle that you see here is a frog skin cell. This big Pac-Man type thing that you see in the center, this is an assemblage of about 2,000 or 3,000 frog skin cells. It's just a big pile of the little cells. We're looking down through a microscope into a petri dish that's about this big, and this video is about 5 millimeters wide. And the Pac-Man thing that you see in the center is about 1 millimeter in diameter. It's about the size of a speck of pepper, just to give you a sense of proportion. Okay, You'll notice that this grouping of 2,000 cells, this grouping of 2,000 frog skin cells is moving. How is this thing moving? There's no frog muscle cells in here. In our lecture on legged locomotion, we talked about muscle being the prime mover in nature. It is the main building block that Mother Nature uses to get things to move around at the macro scale. This is at the micro scale. Turns out that frog skin cells, under certain conditions, will grow very small hairs called cilia. They grow on the surface of the skin cell, and they will spontaneously beat against the fluid. I forgot to mention, you maybe figured this out already, these cells are immersed in a fluid. This fluid is room temperature fresh water. It's basically pond water. Not surprisingly, that's where frogs like to hang out, perfectly comfortable there. Okay, so the cilia are beating against room temperature fresh water. We've got a grouping of 2,000 of these cells. So although you can't see it, the cilia are much smaller than cells, so beyond the magnification of the microscope at this point. These cilia are all on the surface of this thing. Imagine you made a huge boat in the shape of a lima bean, and you put a whole bunch of human rowers on the inside surface of this lima bean shaped boat, put it in the water, and you just told the rowers to row. You'd get some kind of, the boat would move something like this. That's what's happening. Okay. You'll notice some other things happening here. You'll notice that there's these smaller clumps of cells here. As this big thing starts to move around, it kind of acts like a Roomba and basically just pushes all of these loose cells that we've put in the dish in front of them. You'll notice it's got this Pac-Man or lima bean type shape to it. So something that kind of moves like this with the concavity on its front, it's just naturally going to gather stuff into this front-facing concavity, and all of these individual frog skin cells start to smoosh up against one another in this concavity. Turns out that frog skin cells are a little bit adhesive. They're a little bit sticky, so as they start to touch one another, they start to stick together. It's kind of like wet snow, and you start to get these larger and larger multicellular assemblies. So far, so good? Throwing a lot of biology at you. Questions, comments? All good? Okay, last bit. I mentioned that frog skin cells grow cilia. Turns out that individual frog skin cells, if they're not touching anybody else, they don't grow cilia. If you smush 10 of them together, still don't grow cilia. You smush 100 of them together, still don't grow cilia. Push 1,000 of them together, the ones on the surface start to grow cilia. Don't ask me why, nobody knows. It was known that frog skin cells grow cilia. As we were playing around with frog skin cells in the dish, we found this threshold. So it turns out that if this thing makes a big enough balled up mass of frog skin cells in its quote unquote mouth, and that ball of cells gets above 1,000, these balls of frog skin cells start to grow cilia, and about a half an hour after we shot this video, this assemblage here started to swim away. This is a form of self-replication. You've got a whole bunch of frog skin cells, which are collectively making other collectives of frog skin cells. We reported this in a manuscript a few years ago. We had a lot to report in that paper, as you can imagine, but the main thing is, here's a new way that living systems can create copies of themselves. In nature, organisms, plants and animals tend to grow and then sort of bud off or send off a copy of themselves. We mammals, we do it inside ourselves. Other animals grow their offspring on their outer surface and then send them off. Trees create seeds, send them off, grow, and then send the offspring out into the world. This is kinematic self-replication. Kinematic, meaning having to do with motion. It's the way in which that big Pac-Man moves that produces a copy of itself, kinematic self-replication. A previously unknown form of self-replication. Turns out that if you take a whole bunch of frog skin cells, if you take about 2,000 of them and smush them into a sphere, that sphere, as it moves around in the dish, it has no front-facing concavity, so it tends not to make clumps of frog skin cells, which means it never makes babies. It never makes copies of itself. So in this very simple biological system, the 3D shape dictates whether or not this thing, the 3D shape of the parent, dictates whether or not it will produce offspring via kinematic self-replication. Where do you think this shape came from? Kind of came from von Neumann. Inspired, this whole project was inspired by von Neumann. But who came up with this shape? A sphere will not push cells into a pile that becomes an offspring, a baby xenobot. This shape does. In retrospect, it's kind of obvious. You want to make a big pile of stuff, so why don't you make a moving shovel with a concavity on the front? When I was one of the authors on this paper, when we saw this shape and we saw this video, we said, of course, that's the right shape to make big piles, to make lots of offspring, but we didn't come up with this shape. We evolved this shape in a physics engine. We tasked an evolutionary algorithm, not that different from the one you're using in your assignments. We said, find a 3D shape for simulated xenobots. And in that simulation, your fitness, the fitness of one of these simulated xenobots is how many copies of yourself you can make. F equals 0 if you make 0 children. F equals 1 if you make 1 child. F equals 2 if you make 2 children, and so on. Basically, a fitness function rewarding fertility. In simulation, let's see, do I have the video for that? Oh, this is a little bit later. A little bit later in time. I don't have a video of the simulated xenobots. You just have to trust me here. Let me paint a mental picture for you. You've got a whole population of differently shaped things. You take each one of those, drop them into a simulated petri dish. You drop them into a simulated petri dish, sorry. Take each one of those simulated 3D shapes, drop it into a simulated petri dish, sprinkle in simulated individual cells, make those little individual cells adhesive in simulation, and after a while, the evolutionary algorithm discovered this shape that pushed simulated cells together into bigger and bigger piles that started moving. My graduate student at that time, he took that simulated Pac-Man shape, sent it to our biology colleagues at Tufts. Under the microscope, they took a whole bunch of individual frog cells and smooshed them together to make this shape, and then let go and turned on the recording and got this video. Successful sim-to-real transfer of biological robots evolved artificially using an evolutionary algorithm to kinematically self-replicate. Okay, a lot of details that I just threw at you. I don't expect you to remember all these details, but just a demonstration that we're now entering an era where we can create self-replicating robots. In some cases, those simulated robots are built using inorganic materials, metal, plastic, ceramics, batteries, and motors, but we can also create self-replicating machines out of biological materials that self-replicate differently than what we see in nature. Okay. Whether we will get to the point of exponential utility, making self-replicating machines that do useful things as a side project, we will see. Any questions about that? Okay. All right, back to the schedule for a moment. We have finished lecture 18, finished our discussion of scalability, finished open challenges in the field, and for the next 20 minutes, we're going to start in on a discussion of collective robotics. Up till now, more or less, with the exception of the last few robots we just saw, we're usually talking about a single robot. Evolve a robot to walk, grasp, climb stairs, climb a ladder. For a lot of the things we would like robots to do in the real world, having one robot do it is insufficient. We need multiple robots. What are some examples of tasks where one robot isn't going to be enough? Construction site, right? One big complicated robot, maybe, but doesn't feel like the right way to do things. You may recall the Los Angeles fires. There were humans in planes that were flying 1 ton of steel, collecting water from lakes, going into the fire and dropping water. You can imagine there are very serious attempts to create firefighting drones where you would hope that they would coordinate their action. If you're trying to put out something that is spreading exponentially, pretty good to coordinate your efforts. A lot of real-world tasks where we absolutely would prefer not to send humans. We'd like to send machines, but we have to send more than one machine, and they're going to have to coordinate or communicate somehow to coordinate their actions. So we're going to start now in lecture 19 by looking at some swarms of robots, and then next time in lecture 20, we'll continue to look at swarms that are a little bit smarter in the sense that they're better and better at coordinating their behavior. Okay. As always, Mother Nature humbles roboticists. She's figured out coordination long ago. Any birders here? Anybody know what bird species this is? These are starlings, absolutely. The undisputed champions of aerial swarming, otherwise known as flocking. But of course, collective behavior occurs in the air, in the sea. We've got schooling, herding on land. It's been the ability to evolve species that coordinate their actions has been rediscovered over and over again by natural selection. Can we take a clue from how Mother Nature does this to create large numbers of autonomous machines that similarly coordinate their actions? Okay, let's go. Let's have a look at the starlings or schools of fish. Quick pop quiz. Which starling is in charge? Usually when we want to make a swarm of robots, we pick a leader and that leader tells the other. You put together a soccer team. Usually it elects a captain. Humans don't like this solution. This is hard for us to wrap our minds around. We tend to like top-down, hierarchical, command and control things when we're trying to coordinate large numbers of people, right? Sports organizations, universities, militaries tend to be organized in a hierarchical manner. Mother Nature says, I don't need to do things in that way. You can be sure there is no one starling that's in control. How is this possible? How can they keep from bumping into one another if there's no top-down command and control? Turns out the answer is still not completely known, but some things are known. Basically, as you would imagine, every individual starling, single starling in this flock can't see every other starling, especially when they're flocking, right? Each individual starling can see some in its immediate neighborhood, and presumably it's altering its direction and speed of travel based on where its neighbors are and what those neighbors are doing. Now, how exactly they do that? Unknown, but it's probably something like that. That's probably the heuristic. So long ago, back in the 80s, a computer graphics researcher sat down and wrote some code to implement that heuristic. These became known once these little agents started running. They're known as Boids. So I'm going to introduce you to the original Boid algorithm. These are the Boids. Each individual Boyd, and we're going to talk about the green Boyd in the center here, is going to execute 3 separate independent subroutines. They're called separation, alignment, and cohesion. Let's watch the green Boyd execute the separation subroutine. In this one, it looks at all its local flock mates, and in this case, the green Boyd can see 3 neighbors. So the gray circle that you see here, this is its sensing radius. This is something that's programmed in, and everything in blue, we assume the Boyd cannot see. So it sees 3 of its neighbors, and it computes its relative position to those neighbors. And that relative position is represented by the 3 green lines that you see here. It's going to sum up those relative positions and then turn in the opposite direction. So it's basically going to sum these 3 green vectors. And if you mentally sum these 3 green vectors in your head, it produces one big green vector that probably points up and to the left, more or less. So the robot is going to turn a little bit counterclockwise. It's going to turn in the opposite direction. Not surprisingly, that little subroutine is called separation. It's going to alter its heading so that it doesn't crash into the mass of its nearest neighbors. So when we return, when the green Boyd finishes executing the separation subroutine, that subroutine returns a vector which is pulling on its heading. It's a vector that says you should change your heading a little bit in this direction. Before the green Boyd actually turns in that direction, it executes the second subroutine called alignment. And in this case, there's just a different picture, but you can imagine the same situation. The green Boyd does the same thing. It finds all of its local flock mates. In this case, there happen to be 6. It computes the average heading of those flock mates, represented by the green, the 6 blue line segments that you see here, and that's the average heading. The blue vector in here is the average heading, and it's the alignment subroutine is going to return a second vector, which is also a request to change heading to more closely approximate the average heading of your neighbors. So far, so good. So we have one Boyd executed 2 subroutines. It's gotten back 2 vectors, which are competing to change the robot's heading. You can imagine how this goes. The same green Boyd runs the cohesion subroutine. Again, it finds its local flock mates, in this case 4, and finds the average position of them, which happens to be right here. And the cohesion subroutine returns a 3rd vector, which is pointing in the direction of the average position of the flock mates. Okay, the Boyd has finished running all 3 subroutines. It takes the average of those 3 heading change requests, which gives it now 1 vector, 1 request to change heading, and it changes its heading in that direction. So at every time step, in this time step, the green Boyd is doing a little bit of separation, a little bit of alignment, and a little bit of cohesion. So far, so good. At every single time step of the simulation, every other Boyd in the simulation is running exactly the same set of 3 subroutines. They all have identical brains. So far, so good? Okay. Again, you'll have to forgive the author. This was a video shot in the late 80s. Let me see if I can make it bigger for you. When this video was released, this was far and away beyond anything anyone had been able to achieve in computer graphics at that point. And it's automatic. This was what really blew people's minds, is that Craig Reynolds, the author, did not manually move all of the boids. This is not stop motion animation. He was trying to convince the world that it's the boids deciding how to move. Way ahead of its time. Okay, you'll notice some interesting things. Obviously, you see a fair bit of cohesion among a relatively large number of boids. You'll notice that they also flow around obstacles. There is nothing in those 3 subroutines that say detect an obstacle and move around it. Why do the boids flow around obstacles, do you think, given the heuristic I just mentioned?
The first one to hit it, maybe get like bonked away, and then all the others, 'cause they have to average it. Like,
Could be, right? You're changing your heading to face the one in front of you, and all of a sudden it's over here. Good guess, it's possible, and that would probably work. In this particular video, the obstacle itself was also a flock mate, right? So, wow, there's a whole bunch of my neighbors on my left side all of a sudden. I should move to the right. It's kind of a Bratenberg type thing, yeah? So there was a lot going on in that video. One of them was the realization for Craig and other computer graphics researchers, and eventually everybody else, that sometimes you get really cool, interesting behavior for free. This video is no longer available because it's a copyright infringement. It's a segment from The Lion King. You can go watch it on your own. There's a whole bunch of wildebeests that descend into a box canyon. They flow around spurs of rock. They flow around a little baby lion. I never remember its name. You've probably seen this video before. This simple algorithm laid the groundwork for computer graphics in the late 80s and early 90s, and also for CGI and computer animation, which followed about a decade later. Any Marvel movie you watch today and there's a huge fight scene, there is at heart this algorithm running. You can add many more subroutines to this. Any CGI character in any big, complicated, coordinated action scene in a movie today, those individuals are boids. Okay. Questions about that? Okay, let's test our intuition. Let's imagine you ran the relatively simple boids that you saw in Craig Reynolds' original video, but now we're going to knock out cohesion. Every boid is only going to run the first 2 subroutines. How will that collective of boids behave? We take a whole bunch of boids, place them at random positions with random orientations, and turn them on. What are they going to do?
Are they all just going to like slowly drift apart because there's nothing keeping them in an actual swarm formation?
They're going to drift apart because they want to separate. They don't necessarily want to cohere, but they don't just drift apart. They drift apart how?
In kind of one uniform direction.
In one uniform direction. So they all start like this. They kind of collectively decide, quote unquote, which direction to head in. Not exactly the same direction, and then they kind of do their own thing. What about separation and cohesion, and we knock out alignment? Now how do they move? They're trying to separate and cohere, which are kind of counterbalancing one another. They don't care about alignment. What are they doing?
They're all kind of flying towards and away from each other.
Towards and away one another. Are they going to look like birds, schools of fish, flocks of wildebeest? We've mentioned fruit flies in this class once already. You know the no-see-ums in the summer? They all have a cloud around your head. They're not flying in any one coordinated direction. So insects like to do, I don't even know what it's called, basically this. There's no real coordinated alignment in the way that they're moving. Yeah? So you can already see how you can alter collective action by altering these subroutines. Imagine that when these 3 subroutines return a heading vector, we weight those vectors differently. At the moment, it's just an unweighted average. We could weight the average, and you could modulate subtly how the group performs. Okay. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to introduce the experiment we're now going to talk about. This was an experiment from quite a few years back. It's all in simulation, no physical robots. How to take some of these observations about collective action and use it to get robots to start to work together. So I think somewhat unfortunately, the authors chose a particular task, group hunting. Not everyone's comfortable with making swarms of robots. Maybe not the best choice, not very politically correct. Okay, we're going to evolve robots in a moment to collectively hunt. Okay, why hunting? Because there's some fantastic examples in nature of group hunting, coordinated action, in which a single hunter is unlikely to be successful. You may have heard this before. We just talked about lions. So predators have very steep acceleration curves. If you have a cat at home, you know that it'll start from rest and it'll be on your head before you know it. Very, very fast animals, but they actually have a relatively limited top speed. Some of them, others very high top speed. Most of their prey on the Serengeti plain have lower acceleration curves, but once the Thompson's gazelle, for example, gets going, no single lion is ever going to be able to capture it. Assuming a lion is on its own, what's its only choice of action other than go hungry? This one's for the cat people in the room.
I don't know, but I would guess just try and catch the gazelle before it can surpass it with speed, like within the first 4 seconds.
Bring it down within 4 seconds. And if you're the lion, how do you stack things in your favor before these 4 seconds ever start?
Like try and sneak up on it.
Sneak up on it. Get as close as you can and then accelerate. It works, but it's problematic. You have to sneak up and not be seen and not be smelled, all sorts of things. So turns out there's a whole bunch of other options if lions agree to coordinate. So in big cats and lots of other lineages, there were evolutionary transitions between I'm just going to go it alone to working together. The minute that happens, however, things get problematic. We all work in groups sometimes. You all know sometimes groups work, sometimes they don't. You got a whole bunch of big, violent predators fighting over only so much meat. There's a cost to working together. You also have to rely on each other. If you're this lion, who else are you going to team up with? You have to choose your partners carefully. So it's not a free lunch. There are opportunities to be a more successful hunter if you hunt in packs, but you got to solve a bunch of other problems in order for all of this to work. You got to find some other lions that also want to hunt in packs. You got to assume that these lions are going to be trustworthy and they're going to do what you expect them to do, and so on and so forth. So how do we get robots to do that? Well, we're going to see an experiment next time, reported back in 1996, where they're going to use an evolutionary algorithm not to evolve populations of individual robots, but to evolve populations of robot swarms. Swarm 1, Swarm 2, Swarm N. And the fitness of any one swarm, no individual has its own fitness value anymore. They share it. The fitness of a given swarm is its ability to exhibit teamwork and coordination. We'll leave things there for today. You have a quiz due tonight. You're working on weekly milestone 4. See you all on Thursday. Thank you.